So, welcome everybody to this second of two webinars sponsored by Better Brains for Babies this fall. We had one a couple of weeks ago as well, and this one really is sort of a follow up. I want to welcome Sarah Whitaker today. She's going to be talking about promoting children's resilience through mindfulness and SEL practices. So, we are glad to have Sarah. We're glad to have you here. Sarah is, let me make sure I say this correctly, the Family and Community Engagement Specialist at the UGA. It used to be called the Youth Development Institute, and now it's the Center for, Sarah, you're going to help me, Developmental Science. Is that
You
right?
got it.
I got it. Okay, excellent. It was just renamed about a week or two ago. So we are glad to have Sarah here. She's got a lot of expertise on this topic. And Sarah, I will hand it over to you. If you all have questions, thoughts, comments, please feel free to use the chat to share them. I will be sort of monitoring that, and we'll pause to answer questions as we go along. But welcome. We're glad everybody's here.
All right. Thank you for being here, everyone. I hate that I don't have like an extra 3 screens where I can watch everyone, read the chat, see everyone's faces at the same time, but I do have a few faces here in the corner that I can, get to know you all a little bit. So today we're going to talk about mindfulness and social emotional learning practices and how they can be harnessed to build resilience in children, whether that's children you work with, children in your family, or people that you work with in support of children. All right, so just a little bit about me first. Teaching mindfulness, teaching movement, and teaching mindful movement has always been a big part of my life. I have worked in quite a number of different jobs, but all of them have centered reflection and relationships. So that's been through educational programming, organizational development, any number of different jobs, from part-time professor to founder and executive director of a nonprofit that I founded that is called Athens Forest Kindergarten, an outdoor preschool program. My doctorate is in educational psychology, and my current position is building the community engagement unit of a research center that's, as Diane said, it's called the Georgia Center for Developmental Science now. Little bit about me, what I do for fun. Love to build community with my neighbors, read, do fiber arts, bike, and then I have 3 kids who are 6, 8, and 10 years old. So I would love if you took a moment to put in the chat, maybe 2 points, something about you professionally, your job, or what your big question is today, and then something about your personal life if you do want to share. And I'll be watching the chat for now. I saw some people introduce themselves with their position, and I'm very excited to see a lot of different areas represented, a lot of different professional specialties. Folks from Decal. Yeah, if you want to share anything about yourself right now, I'd love to see a little bit about you. Ooh, I see a good question or area of interest. How to help moms teach their children better regulation skills. And we will be touching on that today for sure. All right. I'm going to keep my eye on that. I'm going to move on just a little bit today. That was the about you slide. And before we really dive into content, let's stop before we start and practice together. So whether you've ever done anything like this or not in your life, I invite you to just give it a try with curiosity today. You are welcome to turn off your camera at this point if you are more comfortable. And you can do this with eyes closed or open. If your eyes are open, you can follow this graphic. So we'll jump into the graphic on the next inhale. Here we go. We're going to breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and then hold. And that's a long breath out. Breathe in, hold, And a long, long, long exhale. Breathe in. Breathe out. We'll go a few more rounds. Last round together. All right. The graphic won't stop, your breath won't stop, but our formal practice together will stop. So diving into some of our topics today. Oh, I'm going to have a fun time reading your comments. I better close it so I don't get off track. Professional development specialist, love being in nature. Great stuff. Okay. So resilience, as we are going to use the term today, is going to simply be adaptation to challenges. So we've talked a lot in my center about that term because it's actually part of our current research project. And we've talked a lot about whether the average person understands, it cares about the concept of resilience. We've talked about like ways to make it more simple, ways to make it more interesting to people. So I think that adaptation is a nice synonym that we can use today. And I think the core guiding ideas from this for this presentation today, many of them came from Dan Siegel. I bet some of you know Dan Siegel's work. He has done a lot of attachment research. He writes about the brain, mindfulness, and here he talks about resilience. The belief that we can develop new experiences within ourselves and that we can influence others through modeling, through teaching, and change their capacity for resilience, that's really at the heart of why we're doing this work. There are a couple different popular definitions for mindfulness. So, our pictures jumped. So mindfulness is a particular way of paying attention, and John Kabat-Zinn's definition is definitely the most popular. He has 3 facets to his definition. We're paying attention on purpose, in the present moment, and without judgment. Now, some people argue that that definition is a little bit too clinical, that we're missing an element of heartfulness or ethics. And with that in mind, I've really fallen in love with Dan Siegel's definition, attention and care focused on oneself, or becoming your own best friend, or intrapersonal attunement. So since most of you work with kids, you probably know about attunement and how we try to cultivate healthy attunement and secure attachment between parent and child. This work that I'll talk about today is mostly about how mindfulness can help each individual develop that healthy attachment or attunement skills within themselves. So thinking back to that breath exercise that we opened with today, this is more scientific and more technical than we'll get in any of the rest of this presentation, don't worry. But I think it's really helpful to understand that there are biological mechanisms at play for why some of these practices are effective. And so when we think about exhaling longer than our inhale, it's a very straightforward path to calming the parasympathetic nervous system, or rather activating the parasympathetic nervous system, which has the job of calming. So if you follow this path down to the right, does my little blue dot show when I move it? Oh, okay, cool. I have not done a Canva presentation this way. So the parasympathetic nervous system is what we want to activate. So sometimes the word nervous has a certain connotation, right? We think the emotion, but our nervous system operates in many calming and beneficial ways throughout our body. So if you are ever in a situation um, where you're trying to help someone calm down and they're open to feedback, they're open to strategies, filing away that simple idea of exhaling about twice as long as the inhale is such a helpful technique. And in fact, I'll go off script because I want to show you all what my children and I developed together. It took a few years for them to allow me to share this in my work. It's called our family breath, and it's also called rockets and parachutes. So if you do work directly with children or directly with parents, this can be a fun way to describe that 2-to-1 breath that we practice and the benefits of parasympathetic nervous system activation. So for this particular approach, we make our hand into a fist, thumb is up, so it's like a rocket ship. And we're gonna rocket up to the sky, inhale. And then we have 4 little parachuters that are our fingers, and they float slowly down to earth. Inhale up, parachuters down, 2, 3, 4. So rockets and parachutes is a free takeaway that finally my children have allowed me to share with the world. So when we think about mindfulness practice, today we started with the breath altogether, but it is most helpful to acknowledge these 3 different aspects of the practice: body, breath, and mind, and how we integrate them all together. So mindfulness as integration is another one of Dan Siegel's ways of talking about the benefits of mindfulness. We're integrating left and right sides of the brain, and not in like a um, stereotypical way of like, oh, creative and logical, but there's pathways that are engaged when we're feeling emotional arousal, and there are aspects of the left prefrontal cortex and the right prefrontal cortex that can be integrated by these practices. So we're going to talk about body first. And this is going to be an introduction to some ideas that you may want to bring into your own practice, with the understanding that your own deep attachment and understanding of this work is going to give you the best skills to share it with others. Okay, so rather than talking just about how we teach this to parents or how we teach this to children, I'm going to invite you again to practice. So if you're in a place where you feel comfortable closing your eyes, you can do that. Again, cameras off is fine. You can lean your back against something, put your feet either on the floor, or if you like stretching them straight out, maybe where they're touching something on the base of the soles of your feet. That can help. And if you are in a cozy office or at home where you have a blanket or a pillow, you may even want to set that on your lap. So these grounded approaches and these practices of creating lots of touch with our environment can help with a trauma-informed approach. Okay, optional, eyes closed, again, trauma-informed practice. So the body is this healthy, useful vessel in this practice. We're not trying to change the body. We're not trying to suck in. We're not trying to be taller. We're not trying to engage certain muscles. The body is neutral. And then we're going to sit together for just about 10 to 15 seconds. And while you're sitting, again, eyes opened or closed, I want you, instead of practicing a specific breath, to picture your mind in your feet. What does it discover? Sensation, cold, heat. buzzing. And then picture the mind and the legs, exploring symmetry, exploring other messages the body has. And then picture your breath, your mind in your belly. Another trauma-informed adaptation we could make would be putting a hand on the heart and a hand on the tummy. Picture your mind going into your chest and back. And then mentally travel down each arm, gathering information, simply gathering data, noticing. And finally, bring the mental awareness to your head and neck. And we'll come back together now. If you were practicing along with me, I've talked you through a very brief version of a body scan. This is yet another type of formal practice. So along with rockets and parachutes, you might jot down body scan as an option for coaching someone through a formal mindfulness practice. And you might also note that it's going to become richer and more authentic if you practice it yourself more. All right, third component, mindfulness and like what we're doing with our minds. So in a moment, we'll practice yet again, but before we get there, I just want to point to this wheel of emotions. Many of us who work with families have seen different variations of a wheel of emotions. This is a simplified version that works with children. I'm also, let's see if this clickable link will work here. All right, this is just a neat version that I want to show you. It's an interactive version of the Wheel of Emotions. And so when you click on something, you can talk about the intensity that you experience. You can learn some strategies. So here we start to get into mindfulness and the application with social emotional learning practices. So mindfulness is a personal practice, and social emotional learning is when we start to get into some really specific skills that can benefit our relationships. So all of these are clickable, and this can be great for working with adults, working with older children, whereas the prior wheel is great with younger children. So what we're doing with our minds during many standard formal mindfulness practices is practicing the skill of describing or labeling. It may be counterintuitive because labeling maybe has a negative connotation, right? We're like making a judgment about a person's good or bad qualities, right? Even if that person's ourselves. But in fact, the reason that mindfulness is beneficial in this way is that when we practice facing hard things and labeling them, we become a little bit more of like a journalist. We're simply a scientist noticing what it's like to be a human, and we get a little bit more comfortable with that skill of approaching versus withdrawing. So within our own inner worlds, which are infinitely complex for each of us, we will have the opportunity to see and be with every single one of these emotions when we start to pay attention. And when we get more comfortable approaching those emotions, we can better support parents and children and others that we work with in having the capacity to do that themselves. So approach versus withdrawal. So now I've been through an introduction and gone through the three areas of mindfulness practice that come up in our personal practice, I'll pause and ask Diane, do we have specific questions from the chat that I should address?
I don't see any yet. If
Okay,
anybody has questions, please feel free to continue putting them in the chat.
yeah, please do. So we're going to try to integrate the various things that we've practiced, and this is our third practice that we'll do together. And so again, you're welcome to turn off your camera if you're more comfortable and to try to adopt a body position that feels trauma informed. Look for comfort, look for symmetry. To try to adopt a breath. It doesn't have to be the 2-to-1 breath, but maybe in and out through the nose and a breath with ease. So for me and others who clench their jaws, the jaw, the chin, the tongue may be used to holding a lot of tension. You can think about ease, letting go, and then finally letting our mind be present, focused, and curious. So I'm going to actually go back to our wheel picture, and then we're going to sit together again for just 10 or 15 seconds, eyes open or closed, letting the breath come and go easy. And as a new thought or emotion pops into your mind, see if you can label it without getting caught up in a story. Two more breaths together. All right. And we're back together again. And if you did practice and you were able to label a few different emotions, I would be curious if you could put into the chat how many different emotions you went through in that 15 seconds. You can also put your fingers up if you have enough. 24. All right. So most people go through, ooh, I just saw a comment and I lost it.
She says at
At
least
least,
5.
at least 5. Stephanie Vogel, I have a friend with that name in California. You're not in California, are you? She spells it different. Um, so yeah, most people in a short period of time go through quite a lot of emotions. And there's also research that the average emotion, the average difficult emotion only lasts 90 seconds at full intensity. So this ability to recognize without getting caught up in a story can really help people through some intense moments. And that could be you, right? You are the people that we are trying to help in many cases. Okay, so again, if you're looking for takeaways and you're looking for practices that you can do, nowadays, there are books and games and programs and apps on the market that are very high quality. So when I started doing this work with mindfulness about 15 years ago, people's interest in mindfulness for kids was just getting started. And so I'm really happy to say that there's like a plethora of great resources for you. But what I really encourage you to do as practitioners who work with children or parents is to develop your own ease and comfort with just one of the 3 things that we explored today: the body scan, the intentional breathing, or labeling your thoughts. And then after you've done it 3, 5, 10 times, you'll start to develop your own ways of teaching it. And I think for any clients of any age, focusing on these two characteristics of body, two characteristics of breath, and two characteristics of mind will give you all the tools you need to be an expert mindfulness teacher. So if you're writing stuff down, please consider thinking about comfort and symmetry when you set up the body. Ease and nasal breathing if possible, right? Depending on allergy season for the breath. And attention to the present and curiosity when you're setting up and describing the mind. I've done this work with children as young as 3, and it can be done. All right, so what we just talked about were formal practices. So those are practices where we've set aside time, we've decided that we want to build this skill within ourselves or help others build it. But mindfulness can also have an aspect of informal practice. And so maybe some of you have heard people talk about mindful walking or being mindful when they're cooking. And that can sometimes be a really nice way to enrich one's practice. So paying attention to just one thing at a time on purpose in the present moment and without judgment can sometimes elevate mundane tasks to a really profound level. So I see that many of the people in this webinar today are likely women, and many of us very likely have caregiving tasks within our family as well as within our work. And we live in a culture that doesn't always prioritize the deep emotional skills that are needed to do caretaking work. So when others can't do that for us and we can do that for ourselves, we can pay full attention to the mundane task of wiping a child's nose or making the 18th snack of the day. We can elevate the importance and the sacredness of the task of caregiving. So formal and informal practice both have a role, and I would encourage you for yourself, as I said, to pick a formal practice that you're willing to do a few times, maybe a few times a week, maybe once a day, just for a few moments. And then maybe pick an informal practice. This image has a few ideas. So why am I spending so much time talking about you and your own practice? Well, as this image indicates, the state of the person in charge can really impact everything that's happening around them. So this image clearly is talking about a teacher, and there's research that teachers who engage in mindfulness practice are able to maintain a sense of calm no matter what the classroom is like. So teachers will report that their classroom has gotten quieter, even when it's measurably still just as loud and chaotic as it was before, when the teacher themselves is practicing mindfulness. And so a lot of the work that we do with young children, we cannot make them calm. But when we can find our own calm, we can help them move through the intense emotion that's going to last 90 seconds, or labeling without reacting. Oh, I just realized that all these citations here, obviously you don't have links to them. I can put that into the files that I send at the end of this presentation. All those numbers are just a little teaser here. But this has to do with the benefit of mindfulness practice for students in a school setting and what some of the outcomes are. So attention and learning, I think, is the most common area of interest that people have with children. Like if we teach them how to breathe quietly and calmly, then they'll be able to pay attention. But mindfulness sets the stage for social emotional skills, as we'll talk about a little bit more. And it lays the groundwork for developing inner resilience. So, reduced anxiety, decreased post traumatic stress symptoms. So, these are all measured outcomes. But beware. Mindfulness without ethics or action can be exploitative, and it can overemphasize the individual's responsibility. So I have had the opportunity to do some corporate yoga, and I love the intention of many corporations bringing mindfulness to the workers in their spaces. And sometimes I have noticed that mindfulness can be used to glaze over the systemic changes that are needed. So, for example, this is just a made up scenario about no company in particular, but if a company had people working really long, hard hours in really unfair, inhumane working conditions, and then brought in yoga teacher, mindfulness lessons to try to improve their employee well-being, we would realize that mindfulness is not going to change the scenarios that the people are facing, right? It's not going to change the bigger issues. So it's not up to an individual to change their unfair conditions that they're in. And when we are practicing mindfulness in a work setting, whether that's with children or with parents, I believe that it's up to us to look for ways to change conditions that are inherently unequal that people are facing. So balancing those things is, I think, the hardest part of this practice. All right, so I want to go back to, before I get into SEL just a little bit, to go back to the formal and informal practice and invite people to use their chat window one more time and share with me a formal or informal practice that you are interested in exploring, or maybe that you do already. So let me know if you're like, oh, I'm going to yoga already, or I'm going to look up what mindful walking means. Formal versus informal practice. Any input? Taking my dog for a walk is my informal practice. Yeah. And there's that element of caretaking as well when we take animals out, because like watching them sniff and take their time when we're on a human-centered clock can really challenge our skills. I see someone else commented, I do yoga already, but I think spending more time in nature will be a goal of mine. Yeah, so then you'd have your formal practice on the yoga mat and your informal practice in nature. Another comment about nature. This reminds me of forest bathing, which is a practice from Japan, but there are actually people in Athens who create forest bathing experiences. And that is really a structured time to teach people how to like fully soak into the sensory experience of being in nature. Brushing my long-haired cat is very mindful for me. Diane, I love that. That sounds so beautiful. Walking in the sand barefoot. I also would love to do that. I wonder if that person lives by the beach. All right. Well, thank you for sharing a little about your informal and formal practice goals. Coloring. Coloring is a beautiful one. Yeah, I've always been a collector of hobbies. I introduced myself saying that I was interested in fiber arts. I really dabble. Like I do like the simplest crochet, the simplest knitting, very basic macrame, because the repetitive nature of simple crafts is more mindful to me than like getting more and more and more advanced skills. So coloring falls into that world for me. Lego flowers. Well, now I just want to hang out with you all. I see this person who put about Lego flowers is making me think about someone in town here in Athens who wanted to have the business idea of doing Lego flowers as a children's birthday party idea. Because I imagine there's a little more creativity than just building like a car. Oh, thank you for continuing to comment. I really like this. Trying to focus on one thing at a time, which can be hard, but it is work and practice. Zoning out and centering myself works great for me. hmm And centering oneself, like this is something that I've really been spending a lot of my own like personal time thinking about is how revolutionary it is to center ourselves in a world where we're taught to put others first. So, yeah, being in touch with what we really think, what we really need, and what we really feel can help protect us from self abandonment, putting others first, people pleasing. So I think about working with parents, which I also do. I teach or facilitate Circle of Security parenting groups, which, if you were in the other webinar, Tracy Topple is my coworker and also my mentor in that work. And working with parents, I think there's a lot of opportunities to talk to them about centering themselves, even in the intense time of having young children. Okay, lovely conversation. So I'll go on forward. Talk just a little bit about SEL or what mindfulness and SEL like are in relationship to each other. Social emotional learning, really popular in schools, and there are a lot of packaged programs. There's one that I was about to say, but now I'm blanking on the name. Little Red Door, I think, is a SEL practice or SEL program. But social emotional learning is really important. Mindfulness without SEL, not great. SEL without mindfulness, not as effective. So SEL uses an outside in approach with a focus on building skills, whereas mindfulness works from the inside out. So we're developing our own innate capacities so that then we're more open and more adaptive when we have these skills presented to us through SEL programs or otherwise. So I want to spend a little bit of time on this image, and I want to also tell you all a resource that I really love that this image comes from. It's called CASEL, CASEL, Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. And they really have been at the forefront of the SEL work. And so here we see the wheel in the center with 5 core competencies. And I think that these can really shape our discussions with parents and with children about why we're doing inner work, self-awareness and self-management, why we're caring about others, social and relational skills, and then how we put that into action. So responsible decision making. Maybe I would even say ethical decision making. So like checking in with what's important to us and then putting that into practice in our day to day. So what I think is helpful here, or what might be helpful here, is if people are willing to jump in the chat again, got to get that conversation going. Where are you in your work like on these outer circles? Are you working with families? Are you working on school-wide culture? Are you working? Let me get up here. My little bar. Oops, my little bar is in the way. This top line here. Community. Maybe it says community up there on the top. So just put in the chat for me so I know professionally where you're situated in the realm of how we influence families. Okay. Some people work
See
with,
school, classroom, families.
yeah, educators, with families. Okay, families in the home. Okay, this is great. Yeah, I'm reading along. I told Diane I didn't know if I'd be able to look at the chat with this big of a group, but I'm having fun doing it. Some people work with teachers, so maybe helping to develop that school-wide culture. So when you're thinking about all of the mindfulness practices that we described, the social emotional competencies, and these bigger circles of context, I'd love to hear, and actually people are welcome to unmute as well. I'd love to hear what questions people have, like, how can I bring this into my work? Or when, or how do I talk about it? Would anyone like to unmute? I'm guessing now this is probably no one's first time hearing about mindfulness or social emotional learning. So I'm curious what like leftover questions you have. I'm scrolling back through older people's kind of introduction comments, and I see that Lauren Murphy works as a decal infant and toddler specialist. And Lauren said that she's curious about how to assist children who feel really deeply. I'm thinking of some of the work that Tracy talked about with co-regulation. And so what I have been working on with my own deeply feeling children is my own reaction. Because not just the obvious don't blow up if they're blowing up, but like the subtler things that they can read on our faces and in the tone of our voice to really hold the belief that it is okay to have big emotions and to show them in big ways that maybe we weren't allowed to do when we were growing up. And so part of that practice is how I talk with her when I'm talking about one of my children in particular, how I talk with her when she is in a calmer moment. And then how I talk in my own head when she is having the deeply feeling moment. So teaching can't happen when a child is really activated. So if you're working with infants and toddlers, I mean, they're pretty young, Lauren, but I think there are moments when they're calm that we can plant these seeds, that we can share some phrases, share some ideas. But in the moment, teaching time is over. It's all about you when you're in the moment, or the parents that you work with. Okay, Diane, thanks for the question. Other tips for teaching mindfulness directly to young children. You've shared some good ones, so thank you. When I have done this work with kids, I have gone off script more than any other setting, that kids will do that to us. So I think starting with, play-based practices is always good, but some of the most profound lessons that I've had in a classroom or in a family yoga space have been where they turn into conversations. So when I'm working with kids, I usually do bring a couple of game ideas. So I'll share a couple of my favorites right now. Tossing a ball around the room with eye contact is like a relational skill of how we bounce ideas back and forth and how we build on each other's knowledge. Um, I also take a Hoberman sphere. Do you know what a Hoberman sphere is? They're like those, it's like a contracting ball. It has like a lot of little joints, and the main brand, they're like colorful. I take a Hoberman sphere with me when I'm teaching about breath because I like that it's three-dimensional. Because when we're looking for a deep breath, we've all been told that it's like in the belly or in the chest. And I mean, it's great to get away from our any ideas we have about the belly needing to look a certain way. So it's great to let the belly ebb and flow with the breath. But I think finding that side breath and the back breath and the breath into the diaphragm, like I think that that's really powerful in helping people like deeply connect with the body. So I take that as a visual. And then having that thing with me has led to some other child.
Sarah seems to be frozen. We'll give her just a second to try and catch up. All right, since Sarah seems to be frozen, I'm going to check and see if do people have other questions that you want to ask. I'm assuming she will rejoin us in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording as well.